Wheeler, Executive Director of the Michigan Masonic Charitable Foundation, and we're here today recording another in our Legacy series, interviews of past Grand Masters of the Grand Lodge of Michigan. With us here today is Most Worshipful Brother J Van Kirk, who served as Grand Master of Michigan in the years 1996 and 97. Don, thank you for being with us today. Let's start at the very beginning. Where were you born?
In Detroit, just a few blocks inside of the city limits.
Okay. And tell me a little bit about your parents.
My father was in the Navy, as to go back that far, and he left Detroit, went all the way to California with a friend of his, and his friend came back, and my dad was out there by himself, so he joined the Navy, and spent 4 years in San Francisco and up and down the coast, and came back here. And my father was one of these people that had an innate ability to do mechanical things and put things together that you couldn't believe. He lived a full life and had a problem. He had ulcers all his life, and as a result of that, in those days, he had to drink cream soups and thick cream. Well, what that did was plug up his blood system, and he died from blood clots in his brain due to all this cream he had to eat. But he was a good man. He can do things that I would never even think about doing. When I remember this, one morning I woke up, and actually he pulled me out of bed and said, "Come on, you're going to help me build a garage." I said, "What?" I was about 12. And so I went outside, and here my brother and I, who was 3 years younger than I am, were crawling all over this place, putting the wood in place, and Dad would come up and put everything together. So I helped him build our garage in that house, and I lived there for, gosh, probably 20, 25 years. And then when I got married, of course, we moved away. My father was a strict man. He worked afternoons all his life. He enjoyed that shift, and one day I asked him, "Dad, why do you want to go there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, come home at midnight?" He says, "Because there's no bosses around telling you how to do a job that you already know how to do." And so we got along real well, as far as I remember, because he was never home. I was in school, I got out, and he would be at work, and when I went to bed at midnight, and he was, about 10 o'clock, then he would get home at midnight. So I never did, it was really close to my dad. I don't know my dad's parentage other than he was somewhere in Dutch, because his name was Van Kirk. And Van Kirk was a name from Holland, but it wasn't the real name that I tried to, for years. I went back and got my genealogy on the name, and it was Vander Kirk. And then there was a couple of other pieces that were brought together, but I never could get it all out. But I did get a letter one time from a lady in Holland that said she knew my family's heritage. So we did and played around a little bit with that. But my mother was all Polish, 100%. Never went past the 6th grade, because in those days, women stayed home, had to work. So anyway, they went together, and I had a younger brother, 3 years younger than I was. And he went to college like I did, and he went to engineering like I did. But he kind of went off into another field, and I stayed in electrical engineering and did what I wanted to do there until I reached 20 years with the company. And I decided that I was going to retire, because I had another job that I had worked out called accident investigation and reconstruction. I got involved in it because I knew a couple of lawyers, and they knew what I had done in the past, so they asked me to stay with them and, do this reconstruction of accidents. So I did that for several years, and in fact wrote a book called Accident Investigation and Reconstruction, and it's been published now for about 12 to 15 years. So if you want to buy one, it's still available.
What were Mom and Dad's names?
My dad was Kenneth John Van Kirk. My mother was Helen, but she had no middle name. So everybody just called her Helen. We went to, as a kid, I remember going to a lot of Polish weddings. My dad went along because his family was not that kind. They were standoffish to a degree. But I knew my grandmother on my dad's side real well. She always took the kids to J.L. Hudson's. That was one of her things that she would do when they got to a certain age. So my grandmother took me on an electric train downtown Michigan Avenue from Wyoming all the way to J.L. Hudson's, took me there for lunch, and I had ordered French fries because we'd never had any at our house. We had potatoes, and she didn't bring me French fries, and I started to cry, and my grandmother said, "What's the matter?" I said, "They didn't bring me French fries," and she just chewed that poor waitress out to bring the proper food. Yeah.
So you grew up in the city of Detroit?
No, not really. My folks were renting a house. At that time, my father worked at the old soda plant, which was on Wyoming and Ford Road. Actually, McGraw when you cross the line. And he was renting a house, the bottom portion of a house that eventually ended up right in the middle of the expressway. And so he, believe this or not, he won a pool, money pool at his job, $600 in 1945, 42, somewhere in that area. And so they bought a house out in Dearborn, in the sticks, as they called it, and it was on Ford Road and, just off of Ford Road, called Hubble Street. So it was at Ford Road and Outer Drive. And I remember as a kid, my father would go across Ford Road with a shotgun and kill pheasants because it was all dry land there, you know, so we had a good time there. But my mother was a homebody and, made all the dinners and everything, and she suffered from migraine headaches terribly, and she would have to stay home with all the blinds closed, and put all kinds of things because they didn't have anything for migraines in those days. But that's basically what my folks did. Yeah.
So you mentioned you had a younger brother, and what was his name?
My younger brother's name was Kenneth Robert.
Okay.
And so he was 3 years younger, as I said, and he went to college and got his degree in engineering. He went actually through, and I can't remember the name of the company now. He took a job there for a while and then eventually finished and got his degree. And he now lives out in what we would call the sticks now of Michigan, and I really can't tell you the address because we haven't stayed close over the years like we probably should, but when I lost my wife, he came by and we talked.
So you mostly grew up then in Dearborn?
Yes.
And so you went to grade school and junior high school and high school in Dearborn?
Yes, grade school was at a building very close to here. It was called Salisbury. And I went there I remember there vividly going through the 6th grade. And then 7th and 8th was the building next door. And then 9 through 12, I went to Dearborn High School, which is the plastic glass building next door to us. That was Dearborn High School. And I'm not sure what it is now because I haven't been in touch with them for a long time. But yes, I went to Dearborn High School. And I went to, at that time, was called the Dearborn Junior College for a year or two. And I wasn't doing too well, and so I decided I'd go to the Navy like my dad did. So I joined the Navy, and they found out that I had 2 years of college, so they put me into a special group. So I had to take special courses in They want to know if I could do radar work or electronics work, and I did a lot of that. So I ended up going in the Navy after about 6 weeks or 8 weeks of training. I was an electronics technician, and so I was aboard a destroyer. The USS Mole, M-O-A-L-E, was after a gentleman who had, in the Navy had died under fire. And I was there for about a year and a half, and I had gotten married while I was in the Navy to my wife, Wiva, which was a family name. And she moved to Virginia with me. And so we were there about 3 years, and then I retired from the Navy or left. And we came back to Dearborn, and I finished up my schooling. And she was a medical technician, drew blood in the hospital and all the other stuff that goes along with it. So we spent all our years over there and in that house for a long time. And then we bought another house out in Dearborn. It was a little bit bigger than our first one. And that's where I had my daughter, Cheryl. And I have a granddaughter now named Samantha.
Excellent.
So.
And how old is Samantha?
Samantha is now 15. And she is really doing well. She's a tennis person. She loves tennis. And my daughter was a tennis doubles champion for the state of Michigan for 2 years.
Excellent.
And so they go for tennis quite a bit, and they have a good time. My son-in-law is David Parumba. No, excuse me, wrong one. Can't remember his last name right now, but anyway, they all live out in Livonia. And my granddaughter is a beautiful young girl, and they probably all say that, but I don't care. And we go out quite a bit together and have dinners and Sundays all the time. So we have a good time.
Good. Well, you mentioned tennis. Did you yourself participate in any sports or anything when you were in school?
No, I didn't, because I was busy working.
Okay.
I was a paper boy from the age of 12 to almost 20. I did both a free press in the morning and the Detroit News in the evening or late afternoon on a bicycle, and then in the wintertime I took the bag and carried them around. In fact, I've become an artist by desire recently, last several years, and I did a picture of a young boy with a paper or a scarf on, covering everything, his nose, and a hat, and trudging through the snow, and with a paper bag on his shoulder. It says Detroit News, and I put it up for sale through our society arts group. And it was only up there a week. A guy come in and bought it because he says, that's what I did as a kid.
So did I.
So that was a pretty good deal.
So that was your first job. What was your next job after Paperboy?
Oh my goodness. Well, I worked at a grocery store for a while, bagging groceries, and then left there and went to school, just was going to school, and off and on. Then I decided to join the Navy. I hadn't finished college then. Joined the Navy, and I found my wife. We got married and finished out my tour in the Navy. And the 4 years, I could have gone longer. And she and I discussed it, and I said, well, if you go for 18 and a half years, you can get your retirement from the service. She said, I don't want to be that long in the Navy. I said, well, okay. So I took my release and came back to Dearborn, went back to college. She worked, and I went to school days or evenings, whatever I could get it. And I ended up getting my degree at Wayne State in engineering. Then I got a master's in engineering. And then about 7, 8 years ago, maybe a little longer, I've always loved to sketch. And when I was in the service, I had a sketchbook, and I would get off the ship where we were at, and I would sketch local color and all of that. And so I kind of kept up with that, and now I do it quite a bit. I do a lot of artwork, and a lot of people like it. So I enjoy it very much.
That's good. Well, you mentioned your wife. How did you guys first meet?
You won't believe this, but it was on a train. My wife lived in Doig and worked in Chicago. And of course, she had an apartment there with a bunch of girls. And I was on leave from the training center in Chicago. And I met her on a train. And so we yacked back and forth. And I found out that she lived in Doig and traveled back and forth every couple of weeks. As it turned out, I had a 2 weeks leave, and I was back home with my folks and whoever else I could dig up. And got back on a train, coming back to Great Lakes. My 2 weeks was up. And on the train, I went, maybe that girl's on this train. So I decided to walk through the train. So I did, and they were in the club car. And I walked up to her, and she was talking in a circle with about 4 of the guys. I said, geez, she didn't even care about me because we talked sometime on the train. So I left, and I came back another time to get a beer, and she says, hey, I thought you were going to buy me a drink. Oh, well, okay. Well, that was our meeting. It was on the train. And so I was still at Great Lakes, so I could come into Chicago. So I found out where she lived, and we had dinner a couple times and went out to the shows local over there, and became quite close and decided to get married. So I got married in the Navy, and she moved to Virginia with me. And we stayed there 4 years and came back, and I finished up college, and she was working at Oakwood Hospital as a medical technician.
So when was that then, you guys got married?
Just before I got out of the service in the last 2 years, so I can't remember those dates that far back.
It's all right. All right. So you told us about a couple of your jobs. After you got out of the Navy, you went to school, you got your degree, and then what did you do for a vocation? Is that when you started at Ford, or was Ford a little bit later?
Well, I'm trying to put the thing together. I really can't remember how it happened, but I got into Ford, and I was doing work for an outside vendor through American Sunroof. That was a company that was founded by a man named Heinz Prechter. And he came from Germany, and with the rights to a sunroof that he had patented. And so they would send Ford cars over there and put a sunroof in the car, and then send it back to the Ford factory, and then would go in the line and get finished off. Well, my job, as it turned out, was to make sure that that was all being done right. And so I would hang out over there and see that things were good, and we have a lunch with them, come back to the office and tell them what was happening and what had to be done, and had to track materials, the usual stuff. So I did that for several years, and had a couple run-ins with some of the guys on the line. I used to walk down and make sure that the cars are being done right, and this guy's sitting in a four-door sedan, and the door is open, and he's sitting on the top of the door. And I looked at him, I said, get off the door. He says, who the hell are you? I said, that guy's going to fire your ass unless you get out of that door. So I was known as the guy to be careful, when they saw me going around. But I had a good time, and I enjoyed the job. It was very nice. And we, the 3 or 4 of us that hung around together would go over there and do things like that and make sure these jobs were done. And for some reason I was asked, and I can't tell you why now, to be involved with a legal case that involved an accident. And they said, well, you know, you were involved. And I said, yeah, but, you know, it wasn't anything big. Well, I ended up doing that, and the next thing I know, I'm doing that as a job. Because a couple of attorneys said, well, why don't you come and do that for me? So I took my retirement from Ford and ended up being an accident investigator. And I had ended up with hiring a couple of young guys from Lawrence Tech, taught them what the job was and how to do it, and they did it for a while, and like I did too for a long time. And then I got involved with another program, which right now escapes me. Maybe I'll remember it as we go along.
So who would hire an accident investigator, like a defense attorney, or?
In fact, that I worked both sides of the street, as they say. I did defense attorney work, and there was a couple of cases where I was called by the attorney for the other side to go and do some work for him. So, and I was what was called expert witness, and they'd love to get you on a stand. Well, Mr. Van Kirk, how did you come by what you're doing? And I have to go through an explanation and all of this. And so what was your background, education? You know, on a stand I'm doing all this. So I did that for a long time, and I enjoyed it. It was worthwhile. But then I just didn't want to do it anymore. I was doing something else, which now escapes me. Maybe you'll bring it up in your notes.
Yeah. After you retired from that business, when was that? What year was that?
Oh gosh, I don't remember now.
Were you retired before you were Grand Master or after?
I think I think I was still in the trying to be a Grand Master because I had to go on different jobs, I remember. Okay. So I was still working.
Sometime after that.
Yeah, sometime after that, yeah. Because I remember I had to go out somewhere and come back, and I got back for the meeting, so. Okay. Yeah.
So excluding the Masonic fraternity, do you belong to any other organizations? We were talking briefly about the Exchange Club.
Yes, I want to go back a little bit. You were asking earlier about how I got involved in Masonry, or you're going to, so I think we'll go that way right now. I knew this girl in high school, and it turns out one day I met her husband, and he worked for the C&O Railroad. His job was to take the cars that were on their track, and as long as they crossed over it, they would get charged so much money for being on their rails. And this is what this guy's job was. So I met him, and of course I was married then, so the four of us would hang out, you know, and do things like that. And so that's how I got involved in Freemasonry. Because the fellow I was going with, his name was Grant Hoover, H-O-O-V-E-R. And he lived in Dearborn, and he worked, as I said, getting the money for their train going on the rails. And so we became very good friends, and the four of us went out together a lot, and just enjoyed ourselves as good friends. And then one day he said to me, "You ever thought about being a Mason?" I said, "I don't think so. I don't think probably qualify." He said, "Not necessarily." And so the next thing I know, I had an application, and I signed it, and I went through and took all my 3 degrees and became a Master Mason.
Very good.
Yeah.
Actually, the lodge that I joined, Grand River Lodge, was known as a railroad lodge.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt
all
that.
railroad guys back in the day.
Yeah.
So, what lodge did you join?
I joined Dearborn Lodge.
Okay.
My friend Grant was in another lodge, but when I came up, he came over to Dearborn Lodge with me, and so we stayed there, and we hung around for quite a few years together. Okay. Unfortunately, he passed away several years ago. He was a guy who smoked a lot, and it was on the heavy side, and he was up in his bedroom, and he said he wasn't feeling very good, and he took a shower and came back in the bedroom and hit the bed and fell on the floor dead. Good friend of mine.
Yeah. So you, I know you went through the chairs, obviously, and became a worshipful master of your lodge.
Yeah, it was, oh gosh, it wasn't Dearborn Lodge.
I think Phoenicia Waverly, was it?
Yes, it was Phoenicia Waverly. I was asked by a man that I had met to come over there. I was a member of Dearborn Lodge, but he says, come on, you join Phoenicia and then you can be a member, because Dearborn Lodge was very tough to become a officer in the line. And so I went over there and became, master of the lodge, and went to Grand Lodge, the usual thing. And I had no reason to go any farther. I mean, I enjoyed what I was doing and all that. And I had done a lot of work with Masonic education. I really enjoyed that work. And Dick Sands got me involved in that through several different areas. And we did things like that together. And especially at the times of the sessions, so we would have the education sessions, and we talk about all kinds of stuff. And so Dick came to me one day and he says, I'd like to put your name up for Grand Lodge. I said, I don't want to be Grand Lodge. I want to be in education. I want to teach these young people things that they should know to be a good Mason. He said, yeah, I know. Dick was telling me this. He said, but I really want you to run. I said, I don't want to run. The next thing I know, my name was on the ballot, and Dick is saying, hi, from the audience, and so I went through. I had, like I said, I had no intention of doing that because I enjoyed what I was doing. And so I got pushed and pushed and pushed.
Well, let's back up to your time as master of the lodge. Is there anything that sticks out in that year? It was very memorable, being a first-time master of a lodge.
Yeah. Not really. We had a good time in that lodge, Phoenicia Waverly Lodge, and was an elderly gentleman there who I can't remember his name now, who kind of took me under his wing, and we went hung around together and did things together. And it was not a very regimental lodge. Okay, in other words, yeah, we'd have a do our work and everything else, but then we'd go down and have dinner, or we go somewhere else and have some dinner and enjoy ourselves. So it was a lot of fun. We had good time with those brothers, and it was something that was different than like Dearborn Lodge. I had been to Dearborn Lodge, but very regimental people, and so I stayed with Phoenicia Waverly for several years and just did what I wanted to do.
I know you belong to several appendant and affiliated Masonic organizations. Tell us about some of the ones that you belong to.
Well, I was in Scottish Rite. I went through the line in Scottish Rite and became a thrice potent master. And then I went into the last line, which I can't remember.
The consistory line, yep.
Consistory line, thank you. And so I became the head of the consistory line, and luckily was given my 33rd degree at that time. So.
And I know I think you're a member of all the York Rite bodies.
Yes, I was. I haven't for a long time because there's just too many things going on.
You were also very involved with the Lodge of Research.
Yes, I was. I helped found it. Don Reno and I were very interested in doing this, and I enjoyed the research work. And so we put together a research lodge. We met about every 6 months, I think. I can't remember for sure, but in that neighborhood. And we would give papers. And John Snyder and I were very close on that. We did a lot of that. And we used to have meetings where we just have brothers come up and do a research paper and then come up and read it before lodge. And so we had a very good time with that, and everybody enjoyed it, as I remember, that you were learning things outside the normal view of what you would, run into. And it was very interesting, and we met a lot of good brothers, and I enjoyed it thoroughly, and then it just kind of dispersed.
I think they're still around, but I don't know how active they're at.
Yeah, well, I haven't heard from them for a while.
I know that over the years you've received several Masonic honors and awards. Are there a couple of them that stand out as being more memorable or the most memorable?
Well, I think the 33rd was. That's never ever thought about doing that, I said, I really enjoyed the education part of it and all of this, and the next thing I know, I was nominated for the 33rd, and I said, oh, come on, guys, you're not really being, well, no, we want you to run, so I ended up getting my 33rd degree, which to me was one of the best or most honorable things I could get.
I agree. Tell us about some of the older Grandmasters that you knew before your time.
Oh, gosh.
Not older necessarily by age, but in years of service.
Well, you're talking before I came into the fraternity, I assume, and I didn't know very many of them. I can't really remember one outside of John Polson I knew, but that was because I probably knew him from a dinner somewhere or something like that, but that's about the only one I could remember right now.
And then certainly Dick.
Oh yeah, Dick Sands. We became very good friends, and I still see Dick every so often. Talk to him by telephone, see how he's doing. But that's about as far as we get now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who were some of your Masonic mentors, either in your lodge or Grand Lodge? Or?
Well, that's I was not fortunate, I guess, to have a nice mentor outside of Dick Sands. Dick was a real good friend to me and did a lot of things for me. And in fact, several times I was up to his cottage, and we would discuss things that we should be doing and not doing, and things that the fraternity should be involved in or not involved in. That was Dick's biggest thing, and I enjoyed Dick no end. But over the last several years, we just kind of drifted apart. But he was a man that I would follow anywhere, whatever he wanted to do. And he and I had the same feelings about the way the fraternity has gone the last several years. It's the fact that the men are not being taught what Masonry is about. Masonry is not coming to dinner and having a couple beers and going home. Masonry is teaching the other brothers what the fraternity is about, what they can do in the fraternity. And I wrote several papers about these things, and they're available through the Masonic bookstore. But Dick and I were very close on those particular areas that, we just aren't doing enough to teach the young people what Masonry is all about. We take them out, give them 3 degrees, push them out the door, and say, give me the next one. And Dick and I said, you can't do that. You've got to get these guys interested in what Freemasonry is, and that's why we started the Research Lodge. Because we would show research papers. I must have had at least 10 or 12 guys who would do that, and we met about once every 2 months or 3 months, whatever it was, and we would have anywhere from 1 to 5 papers, depending on what was going on. And they all enjoyed it afterward. They would sit down and talk, said, yeah, because we'd have usually a lunch afterward. And they said, how did you come up with this and that? And then we'd talk about the papers and what they were and how they did things. And I wish I could do that again, because it was so great to talk to somebody and say, have you heard about such and so in England, or some other place? And it just was a different kind of thing.
You touched a little bit on how you got into Grand Lodge, how Most Worshipful Brother Dick kind of prodded you along, but
yeah.
You hadn't really had any time at all to think about it prior to, did you go to Grand Lodge and just get nominated?
No, Dick did that to me.
Okay.
I had been to Grand Lodge, before, and would get there and sit and listen, and then we'd get boring, we'd go out, or come back. And Dick kept saying, I think you really ought to join Grand Lodge. I said, I don't want to join Grand Lodge. I enjoy what I'm doing. I enjoy the education, the training. To see a young man, you sit down and talk to him and said, this is Freemasonry and how it works. And he would say, geez, I didn't know that. And you'd sit there and say, I got him. He understands what we're talking about. And that's what we tried to do. And it was, they had, I don't know, maybe a dozen guys came through, and we talked to them, and every so often I'd go to a lodge meeting, or not a lodge meeting, but a research lodge meeting, and we'd sit and yak, a bunch of us would. We had a good time. I really miss it.
So once you got in the Grand Lodge line, and as you progressed through the line, was there anything that really just surprised you, that you were like, man, I had no idea?
I was surprised after I got in. I was down at the bottom of the line, and Bill Skripnik was the Grand Master at that time. And I was the runner, as you know what that means. And we sat around and talked a lot. And Bill was a nice guy. He enjoyed talking, and we talked a lot about what things had to be done and what should be done. But Bill didn't want to push it. He said, if they want it, we'll give it to them. And that's about the way it was.
Okay. So let's talk about your year as Grand Master. You progressed through the line. You became Grand Master in 1996. What were a couple of the highlights of your year?
We had some problems during my Grand Lodge year. I can tell you what they are right now because I can't remember, but it had to do with things that were going on outside of the fraternity, but it was something that, as an example, one that sticks out right now that comes to mind is there was a Mason who had a couple of drinking establishments, and he had these games on his bars where, he was collecting money from them. And I went up there as Grand Master, and I said, you can't do that. He said, why not? I said, because you're gambling. You can't gamble. Well, I'll gamble any way I want. I said, go right ahead. And he says, you're not going to say anything? I said, no. You just receive a piece of paper from me that'll tell you you're no longer a Mason. And he said, you can't do that. I said, read your blue book. And so he came back, and what I actually did is, that's the only guy that I know of, I pulled his membership. And I must have got a dozen letters from other members that saying, this is a nice guy, and he wasn't thinking, and yada, yada. And so I had a meeting with him and all the brothers, and I said, do you really know what you're talking about? I said, I didn't want to pull your charter for the lodge, because all the lodge members were there. But I said, you guys have to understand that you have to do it by that blue book that we have, and that's what it's all about. I said, I didn't enjoy pulling your charter. It was not something I wanted to do. But I had to teach you a lesson. So we talked for a while, and finally they said they would do this and do this. And one lodge was running like a poker game every so often. I went over to him one night, I said, you can't do that. Why not? I said, because you're doing that at a Masonic meeting. So, they never said anything to me about it, but eventually the whole thing went away. So,
how about a good thing? How about a good memory?
A good thing, okay. When I was Grand Master, let's see. Well, I enjoyed meeting with the girls, The
youth groups?
Yeah, the youth groups. I had a good time with them, and we enjoyed getting together. And the duly boys, it was a lot of fun. Had a great time with them from, the picnics and whatever we did at the time. So that part of it was good.
Okay, good. Looking at the fraternity today, What do you think we need to do to make our fraternity grow again?
We have to look for young men who are somewhat interested in the fraternity, but not necessarily to the depth that we're thinking about right now. But we know that all you have to do is ask a question to a person you know. He's upright, standing, a good man in the fraternity or in the world. And you say, have you ever thought of being a Mason? And I've done that to a lot of people. In fact, one time I was in the hotel in Grand Rapids at one of our sessions, and this bellboy brought my luggage up. He says, excuse me, sir. He says, but I understand you're a Mason. I said, yes, sir. He said, I'd like to become a Mason. So I took his name and address and called the lodge up and told him about it. And I said, I want you to call him and talk to him, and you call me back. So he did the next day, and they had a new brother in lodge over there. This is the kind of thing that I feel that we should be doing. In other words, you go to a dinner anywhere and say, is there anybody here that's a Mason? You know anything about Masonry? And they all look at you, well, okay, fine. But you did something about it. We have to go and look for people who are interested and saying, I want to find out more about that. What is that? I've heard it before. And that'll get us involved in it by getting these young people to say, you ever thought about this? You ever thought about that? You've been to the Shrine Circus before? Well, yeah. Do you know that the Shrine is part of the Masonic fraternity? Geez, I never knew that. And you're in the door. And that's what we need to do, but we don't do that.
Be proactive.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you.
What advice would you give somebody that was thinking about joining Freemasonry?
Basically what I just said, why do you want to join? I went on a lot of, going to the homes of Masons, and I would ask the man in front of his wife. Then they had to be there. And I said, do you know what your husband's getting into? Well, no, not really. I said, would you have the time to sit down and talk? And we did. And she says, that sounds like a pretty good thing. I says, it is. I said, these guys are not going out drinking. They may have a drink afterward, but that's not going to be a solicitous thing. I said, we're going to go in and describe what we're about, what we're trying to do. We're trying to show young men that how to lead a better life. What is the good things about Masonry? What is the bad things about Masonry, which are not very much if they don't do, keep their nose to their grindstone. But I always keep saying that teach these young, as soon as you get the third degree, you sit down and you talk to them. Or the next time they come to lodge, you say, let's talk about what you joined. What do you feel about this? Why do you think that you should talk to him? And what do you think you could show them or tell them? And why would you want to do it? Why do you want to join Freemasonry? Why did you? That's what I would do if I was doing it.
Mentoring. What would you tell a young man or a member of the fraternity that was going to become Worshipful Master for the first time? What advice would you give him about being a good Worshipful Master?
I would have talked to him long before that. Usually they have, 3, 4, 5 years before they become master of their lodge. And I would, tell them, you can't go through the line just playing games. You have to learn everything that you're going to have to know before you get to that chair. And I've seen so many masters of a lodge, they'd walk in and say, what do I have to do now? And I'd go up and I said, don't you know what you're supposed to do? Well, I've only had this job for 6 months. Well, that's half your year, Slick. So, we talk about it, and I'd say, then I'd go through it with him. But that's what I say. Anybody who wants to go through his lodge, you have to do it for 4. There should be the same kind of thing. This is what you're going to do. This is what you have to know. You don't have to know ritual. Everybody thinks the only thing about Freemasonry is the ritual. It isn't. It's a small part of it. And the only reason we talk about the ritual is because they feel that it has to be it. And I'd like to tell another story, if I may.
Sure.
I was, like I told you, working through American Sunroof out to their company headquarters, and I had my book in my back pocket. And this guy who was running the building at the time saw that. He says, "What do you got in your back pocket?" It's none of your business. He says, "Come into my office." Oh, Christ, I'm going to have a meeting with this guy. And he walked in there, and he had pulled his book out of his pocket. He says, "When we come over here, we're going to do this every time you come over." It was great. He was terrific with me. We just had a great time, and he ended up going to Florida because his mother left him a lot of money. But that was the kind of guy that you look at. He wanted to go out and help you because he saw, you know, the book in my back pocket, so he knew I was doing something, and he tried to help me. He did. It was fantastic. Yeah.
That's great. Along those same lines, what would you tell somebody that was thinking about running for Grand Lodge?
Same thing, only more. Grand Lodge is not, "I'll wait 5 years and then I can do it." Okay, I've seen a lot of guys do that, go through the line, and we've had some, shall we say, not as best masters grandmasters that we should have had. They think that they can go in there and wait 3 years because you have the two small pieces in between, and then all of a sudden you're jumped up and you're a junior grandmaster,
Grand Warden.
Grand Warden, thank you. And then you say, "Geez, you wonder, I didn't do anything all this time." So you've got to start with these men. You say, "Okay, now you've gone down to the bottom. You've made it. Now this is what you have to do. You don't have to learn the blue book. You have to talk to all the members of your lodge, Grand Lodge. What are you doing? What have we done in the past? What do we need to do in the future? This is what we have to do, and we're not doing it."
Planning. How has Masonry impacted your life?
That's funny. As Grand Hoofer used to say, it's not funny tee, it's funny peculiar. That I didn't know anything about Masonry until I met Grand Hoover at the railroad, and we talked and we talked and we talked, and he was a wonderful guy. I enjoyed him thoroughly, and that was he talked to me about Freemasonry. He said, you know, he worked for the railroad, and the one for the, I can't remember the name of the line, but they had to cross this river, if you want to call it, but it wasn't that big. And so his job was to station there and raise the drawbridge so the boats could go through it and put it back down. And so he sat there all the time. You know, this was part of his job. Well, he'd sit there, and when the boatmen come in, they would sit there and practice their ritual. And he was very good at it, and he would take all the young people and do the same thing. And I'm saying, Grant, why don't you do that to all these guys? He says, they don't want to listen. And you know, we know that's true. So those are the guys that you want to search out. When you take them in the lodge, you sit and look at them. You say, this guy seemed interested. Maybe I'll just talk to him for a little bit. Say, hi, how you like being a Mason? Yeah, well, you know, I like it. Why? And you get a little started. And the guy will go home and say to his wife, you know what, I talked to a guy down there today. He's pretty good. And I think I want to talk to him again.
Any final reflections on the fraternity?
It's a big question. Masonry is worldwide. I was in a lodge in England with one or two people, I can't remember now for sure, it's been quite a while. And I went through their entering the lodge, you know, and of course I was past Grand Master then, so it was a little bit different. But these men, we would go through their lodge, and then we'd have dinner, and then my wife and I were staying, several blocks away, and this guy told me he says, "Rain outside, come on, get in my car and I'll take you there." I said, "Okay," got in the car. Come to find out, this was in Hong Kong. I was in Hong Kong. And this guy says, "Come on, I'll give you a ride to your apartment, or your place." I said, "Okay." Got in the car. Come to find out, this guy is the Far East man who handles all of the work for one of these electronic companies. And I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm taking you back to your building." I said, "I know, but you know." He says, "We're all brothers." And it was just amazing to see this guy and talk to him. And he drove right up on the sidewalk and got me out of the car so that, you know, I wouldn't have to get wet. But he's a guy who was in charge of all the Far East electronics from Motorola. I said, "My goodness." Talk just like we are, having a good time. And then when he got in the car, he says, "Let me give you a ride." I said, I found out who he was and all this, and I'm going, wow.
It is a worldwide fraternity.
It is a worldwide fraternity. And like I said, I've been lucky to go to England. I was over there and went to several lodges. I've been in lodges in other countries, not too many, and then a few, but a lot of different cities. When I go around, I say, "Yeah, hello, you have a lodge meeting tonight?" "No, this is a story." And I call him up and I say, "Is there a lodge meeting there?" I was working at the time, and I was in this city doing something. And he says, "No, I'm sorry, we don't." He says, "Who is this?" I said, "Well, I'm from Dearborn, and I'm here, and I thought I could get to dinner with somebody." He says, "Where are you at?" I said, "I'm at so-and-so," and he says, "Stay there, I'll be right over." This guy he cleans the building, but he's a Mason. He come over, picked me up, took me out to dinner. That's Freemasonry.
Yep.
That's what it's all about.
It is.
That really is. And to me, that's Masonry in a nutshell.
Well, Most Worshipful Brother Don, we'd like to thank you very much for participating in our Legacy series, and we wish you the best of luck in the future.
Thank you very much.